Have you ever felt a cold dread snake its way into your heart, a certainty that the world you knew, the life you had so carefully built, was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces? For Clara, that feeling arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, wrapped in a deceptively cheerful-looking gift bag. The house was quiet, filled with the soft, golden light of late autumn. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a peaceful scene that stood in stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She was in their walk-in closet, a space that smelled of her husband Mark's cologne and the cedar blocks she tucked into the corners. She was looking for a shoebox to store old photographs, part of a surprise anniversary gift she was making for him. Their 10th anniversary. A decade of laughter, of shared dreams, of weathering small storms together to build this quiet, comfortable life. Her hand brushed against something tucked away behind his winter coats, a place he rarely reached into. It was a small, glossy bag from a boutique she didn't recognize. Her first thought was a flutter of excitement. Maybe he'd bought her anniversary gift early. A small, guilty smile touched her lips as her curiosity got the better of her. She told herself she wouldn't peek inside, just feel the weight of it. But the bag was light, too light for jewelry, too soft for a watch. Her brow furrowed. With a gentle tug, she pulled it from its hiding place. The bag was a deep, elegant navy blue, tied with a silver ribbon. Tucked under the ribbon was a small, cream-colored envelope. Her heart began to beat a little faster. His name, Mark, was written on the front in a delicate, looping script that was most certainly not her own. A chill, sharp and unwelcome, traced a path down her spine. This was not for her. This was a secret. With trembling fingers, she untied the ribbon. The rustle of the tissue paper inside sounded like a scream in the silent house. She parted the paper and saw it. A folded piece of glossy paper, black and white and clinical. A sonogram. A tiny, grainy image of a life just beginning. Beneath it lay the card. Her breath caught in her throat, a choked, painful sound. Her vision blurred. The image swam before her eyes, a tiny profile, a small, curled spine. A baby. A baby that was not theirs. A baby she knew nothing about. She felt the floor tilt beneath her feet, the solid ground of her marriage turning to quicksand. Every happy memory, every whispered promise, every shared glance over the last 10 years curdled into a lie. She was the overlooked wife, the fool pottering around the house, planning an anniversary for a man who was building a new life with someone else. The beautiful, sunlit room felt suddenly like a cage, and the silence was no longer peaceful but suffocating, filled with the deafening roar of her own breaking heart. The moments after the discovery were a blur of cold, mechanical actions, a desperate attempt to pretend that her world hadn't just ended. Clara carefully placed the sonogram and the card back into the navy blue bag, retied the silver ribbon with numb fingers, and pushed it back into its dark corner, behind the heavy wool of Mark's winter coats. But she couldn't hide the truth from herself. The image was burned onto the inside of her eyelids. She walked out of the closet and into their bedroom, a room that had always been her sanctuary. Now it felt alien, a stage set for a life she no longer recognized. The king-sized bed they had picked out together, the framed photos on the nightstand, one from their wedding, another from a trip to Italy, they all seemed like props in a cruel play. She sank onto the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning under her weight. Her body felt heavy, impossibly heavy, as if the grief had a physical mass. Who is she? The thought echoed in the hollow space that had just been carved into her chest. She was Clara, the wife. The partner. The other half of Mark and Clara, but now a new name had been added to the cast of her life, a name scrawled on that cream-colored card. Evelyn. She had forced herself to read it, her eyes scanning the words as if they were written in a foreign language. "My dearest Mark," it began, "I can't wait for you to meet our little secret. This is just the beginning of our forever. All my love, Evelyn." Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, piercing through a decade of trust. Our little secret. Our forever. The words mocked her, turning her love and devotion into a pathetic joke. She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the familiar suburban street without really seeing it. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. She was the overlooked virtuoso of their home, the one who orchestrated their life with quiet confidence, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who knew how Mark liked his coffee and which blanket he reached for when he was tired. She had believed her role was one of love and partnership, but now she saw it through a different lens. She was the comfortable, predictable background character, easily ignored while the real story unfolded elsewhere. The betrayal was so profound, it stole the air from her lungs. She had given him everything, her heart, her trust, her future. And in a quiet corner of their shared closet, she had found proof that he had given a piece of that future to someone else. When Mark came home that evening, the house was filled with the aroma of roasting chicken, a scent that normally meant comfort and warmth. But tonight, it was a facade, a carefully constructed piece of normalcy that cost Clara every ounce of her remaining strength. She heard his keys jingle in the lock, the familiar sound of the door opening and closing, his cheerful call of, "Honey, I'm home." Each sound, once a welcome part of her daily rhythm, now grated on her raw nerves. He walked into the kitchen, a smile on his face, oblivious to the emotional wreckage he was about to encounter. He leaned in to kiss her, but she turned her head at the last second, so his lips brushed her cheek instead of her mouth. It was a small, almost imperceptible rejection, but it was all she could manage. "Tough day?" he asked, his smile faltering slightly as he studied her face. He saw the tension in her jaw, the dullness in her eyes that were normally so bright. "Something like that," she replied, her voice flat. She turned back to the oven, using the motion to hide her expression. The dramatic irony was a suffocating blanket. He was standing right there, the architect of her misery, and he had no idea that she knew. He began to talk about his day, a frustrating meeting with a client, a funny email from a colleague. He spoke of their anniversary plans, confirming the reservation at the French restaurant she loved. 10 years, Clara. Can you believe it? I feel like the luckiest man in the world. His words, meant to be loving, were like acid. Luckiest man in the world. Was Evelyn the reason he felt so lucky? Was their little secret the cause for this newfound joy? She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the pot of simmering potatoes at his head. She wanted to pull out the navy blue bag and demand an explanation, to watch his charming facade crumble into dust. But she said nothing. She just nodded, her movements stiff and robotic. "That's nice, Mark," she murmured. He finally fell silent, sensing the impenetrable wall she had erected around herself. "Clara, are you sure you're okay? You seem distant." His concern felt like another betrayal, another layer of deceit. How could he stand there and pretend to care about her feelings when he was so callously trampling on her heart? "I'm just tired," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life, watching the man she loved move through their home, a stranger hiding a devastating secret. The weight of her discovery was a physical burden, and carrying it in silence, in his very presence, was the hardest thing she had ever had to do. In the days that followed, Clara became a detective in her own home, driven by a desperate, agonizing need to understand the scope of the betrayal. The name Evelyn was a constant, throbbing presence in her mind. Who was this woman who had so easily stepped into her life and claimed a piece of her husband? The house, once a haven, became a landscape of potential clues. His phone, which used to lie casually on the counter, was now an object of intense suspicion. One night, while he slept, she succumbed to the temptation she had been fighting. Her hands shook as she picked it up, her thumbprint unlocking the screen, a privilege she now saw as a grotesque irony. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she scrolled through his contacts, her eyes scanning for the name. Evelyn. There it was. Evelyn Reed. The name was attached to a number, but no picture. It was a sterile entry, which was somehow more terrifying than a familiar face. It felt clandestine, deliberately hidden in plain sight. Her search moved to his social media, a place she rarely looked. She typed the name Evelyn Reed into the search bar, her breath held tight in her chest. A profile picture appeared. A woman with warm, smiling eyes and dark, curly hair, standing beside a lake at sunset. She was beautiful, but not in a way that Clara found intimidating. She looked kind. This somehow made it worse. This wasn't some fleeting, thoughtless mistake. This was a woman you could build a life with. As she scrolled through Evelyn's public photos, her stomach twisted into a tighter knot. She found a picture from a work conference several months ago. It was a group shot, but in the corner, Mark and Evelyn were standing next to each other, laughing at something just out of frame. They weren't touching, there was nothing overtly inappropriate, but to Clara's wounded eyes, their shared laughter was an intimate confession. The caption read, "Great minds at the Reed and Lansing Project launch." Reed. Evelyn Reed. This was his colleague, the lead architect on the new development project he had been so excited about, the one he had spent late nights working on. He had mentioned her name before in passing. Evelyn has some incredible ideas for the green space. Evelyn managed to solve the zoning issue. Clara had listened, offered support, and never once suspected that the name belonged to the woman who was carrying his child. The cynicism washed over her, cold and absolute. The late nights, the passionate talk about work, it was all a lie. He wasn't building a legacy of architecture, he was building a new family. The antagonist was no longer just a shadow. She had a face, a name, a shared history with her husband. The evidence was circumstantial, a collection of puzzle pieces that she had pieced together into a portrait of deceit. And with every piece she found, the love and trust she had held for Mark eroded, replaced by a cold, hard certainty that her marriage was a sham. The silence in the house grew heavier with each passing day, becoming a third presence in their marriage, an entity that sat between them at the dinner table and lay between them in bed. Clara moved through her days in a fog of grief and anger, the effort of maintaining a semblance of normalcy draining her completely. Mark, for his part, grew increasingly desperate. The distance she had put between them was no longer a subtle chill, it was a glacier, cold and impassable. He tried everything. He brought her flowers, which she placed in a vase without comment. He suggested they watch her favorite movie, but she claimed to have a headache. His attempts to reach her were met with polite, one-word answers that shut down any hope of real conversation. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He cornered her in the living room one evening, his face etched with a mixture of frustration and genuine pain. "Clara, this has to stop," he pleaded, his voice raw. "Whatever is wrong, you have to talk to me. I can't fix something when I don't know what's broken. It feels like I'm losing you." His words, which once would have melted her heart, now ignited a spark of cold fury. He was the one who had broken them. He was the one with the secret, and yet he was acting like the victim. The injustice of it all was a physical blow. But in that moment, seeing the real anguish in his eyes, something inside her shifted. She was tired of being the passive sufferer, the silent victim of his choices. The pain, left to fester in the dark, was consuming her. She realized she couldn't live like this, trapped in a limbo of suspicion and sorrow. She had to know the truth, no matter how ugly it was. She had to confront him. The power in her story was no longer his to hold, it was hers. She would take control of the narrative. A sudden, steely resolve hardened within her. She would not let their marriage die a slow, silent death. If it was going to end, it would end with the truth out in the open. Their 10th anniversary was in 2 days. The reservation at La Lumiere, the restaurant where he had proposed, was still booked. It was meant to be a celebration of their beginning. Now, with a grim sense of poetic justice, Clara decided it would be the stage for their potential end. She looked at Mark, her expression unreadable. "You're right," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "We do need to talk. Let's talk at dinner." On our anniversary, Mark's face flooded with relief, misinterpreting her resolve as a promise of reconciliation. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Clara. Thank you." He had no idea he was agreeing to a trial, and she was preparing to be the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury. The evening of their 10th anniversary arrived with a somber, cinematic weight. Clara dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple black dress, the one she usually saved for funerals. Her reflection in the mirror was that of a stranger, her eyes holding a deep, weary sadness that no amount of makeup could hide. Mark, dressed in his best suit, was a portrait of hopeful anticipation. He held her hand in the car on the way to the restaurant, his thumb stroking her knuckles, completely unaware that he was holding the hand of a woman who was about to detonate a bomb in the center of their life. La Lumière was just as beautiful as she remembered. Soft lighting, quiet music, the clinking of glasses, it was a symphony of romance that felt like a personal insult. They were seated at their usual table in the corner, the same one where he had gotten down on one knee a decade ago. The waiter poured champagne, and Mark raised his glass. "To 10 years," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And to the amazing woman who made them the best 10 years of my life. I love you, Clara." She met his gaze over the rim of her glass, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She took a sip, the bubbles tasting like acid. He then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside was a delicate diamond necklace, a string of light that glittered under the candlelight. "Happy anniversary," he whispered. For a moment, she almost broke. The gesture was so loving, so perfectly Mark, that it almost made her doubt everything. But then she remembered the sonogram. The card. The name Evelyn. She hardened her heart. She pushed the velvet box gently back towards him. "It's beautiful, Mark. But I can't accept it." Confusion clouded his face. "What? Why not?" This was it. The moment had come. With hands that trembled only slightly, she reached into her purse and pulled out the navy blue gift bag. She placed it on the crisp white tablecloth between them, a dark omen in the romantic setting. "Because I found a gift that was already addressed to you," she said, her voice low and steady, belying the storm raging inside her. She pushed the bag towards him. He stared at it, his brow furrowed in complete bewilderment. He opened it slowly, his eyes questioning hers. He pulled out the card first, then the sonogram. Clara watched his face, ready for the flicker of guilt, the telltale sign of a man caught in a lie. She was prepared for denial, for anger, for desperate excuses. But she was not prepared for what she saw. As Mark's eyes fell upon the grainy black and white image, his expression shifted through a series of emotions so rapidly it made Clara dizzy. First came utter confusion, as if he were looking at an artifact from an unknown world. Then his face paled. The color drained away, leaving his skin a ghostly white under the restaurant's soft lights. But it wasn't guilt that shadowed his features. It was something deeper, something far more devastating. A wave of raw, gut-wrenching anguish washed over him, so profound and so absolute that it silenced the accusations forming on Clara's lips. His jaw tightened, and his eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were swimming in a sea of unspeakable pain. A single tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He looked utterly broken. Where did you find this?" he finally managed to ask, his voice a hoarse whisper, cracking with an emotion she couldn't place. "In your closet," she replied, her own voice barely audible. The fury she had nursed for days began to dissipate, replaced by a bewildering sense of confusion. This was not the reaction of a cheating husband. This was the reaction of a man reliving a nightmare. He took a shaky breath, his hands trembling as he held the small photograph. "Clara," he began, his voice thick with unshed tears. "This isn't what you think. This isn't what it looks like at all." He looked from the sonogram to her, his eyes pleading for her to understand before he even spoke the words. "Evelyn. Evelyn wasn't my lover." He paused, swallowing hard against a sob that threatened to break free. "She was my sister. My little sister." The words hung in the air between them, completely altering the reality of the situation. Clara stared at him, her mind struggling to process the information. His sister? He had a sister he never talked about? "She passed away, Clara," Mark continued, his voice breaking completely now. "A month ago. There were complications with the pregnancy. A sudden embolism. We lost them both." He gestured to the sonogram, his gaze distant and filled with a terrible sorrow. "Her little boy. My nephew. We lost him before I ever had a chance to meet him." The truth, when it came, was so much more tragic and complex than the simple, ugly story of infidelity she had constructed in her mind. Evelyn Reed wasn't the other woman. She was family. And the secret he had been keeping wasn't one of betrayal, but of a grief so immense he had been unable to share it. The elegant restaurant, with its soft music and romantic ambience, faded into a blur. The only thing that felt real was the raw, unfiltered grief pouring from the man sitting across from her. Mark's carefully composed exterior had crumbled, revealing a vulnerability Clara had never seen before. He explained everything, the words tumbling out in a rush of pain and regret. Evelyn had been his younger half-sister from his father's second marriage. They hadn't grown up together, but had reconnected a few years ago and become incredibly close. She was a single mother-to-be, fierce and independent, and she had been overjoyed about her baby. Mark had sworn to her that he would be there for her and the child, that they wouldn't be alone. "She put this gift bag together for me," he explained, his fingers tracing the edge of the cream-colored card. "She was going to visit, to surprise me with the news that I was going to be an uncle. She wanted to tell me in person, but she never made it." The embolism was sudden, catastrophic. One day she was sending him excited texts about nursery colors, and the next she was gone. Mark had been the one to get the call. He had been the one to go to her small apartment, to sort through her belongings, to pack up a life that had ended far too soon. It was there, on her kitchen counter, that he had found the navy blue gift bag with his name on it. A message from a future that would never happen. "I didn't know how to tell you, Clara," he confessed, his voice choked with shame. "I was so broken, so lost. Our anniversary was coming up, and you were so happy, so excited about it. I couldn't. I didn't want to bring this darkness into our celebration. I didn't want to ruin it with my pain." He had been trying to be the perceptive authority figure, the protector of their home, shielding her from the tragedy. But in his grief-stricken attempt to protect her, he had ended up shutting her out completely, creating a chasm of silence and misunderstanding between them. He thought he was carrying the burden alone to spare her, but all he had done was make her feel alone. In that moment, Clara's role was rewritten. She was no longer the scorned wife. The pain of her perceived betrayal dissolved, instantly replaced by a wave of profound, overwhelming empathy. Her hidden talent, her deepest virtue, was not her organizational skill or her memory for small details. It was her immense capacity for love, a love strong enough to see beyond her own hurt and connect with his. She saw it all with devastating clarity now, his distance, his pensive moods, the shadows in his eyes. It wasn't deceit. It was grief. She hadn't been overlooked. She had been looking at a man so shattered by loss, he didn't know how to ask for help. The wall that had stood between them for weeks, built brick by brick with suspicion and silence, crumbled into dust in an instant. The anger and hurt that had coiled in Clara's stomach unwound, leaving only a deep, aching tenderness. She saw not a betrayer, but her husband, her partner, drowning in a sorrow he felt he had to navigate alone. Without a word, she reached across the table, her hand covering his. His fingers were ice-cold. He looked up, his eyes filled with a gratitude so immense it took her breath away. "Mark," she said, her voice soft but firm, filled with the strength he had lost. "You don't have to carry this alone. We carry it together. That's what we promised." The promise wasn't just for sunny days and happy anniversaries. It was for the storms, for the darkness, for the moments when one of them couldn't stand on their own. The rest of the dinner was a blur. They left the expensive food untouched, the champagne undrunk. The drive home was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now, not one of tension, but of shared understanding, a quiet space for their hearts to begin processing the monumental shift that had just occurred. Back in the sanctuary of their home, Mark led her to the small box where he had kept Evelyn's things. He showed Clara pictures of his sister, a smiling girl with his same eyes, a young woman graduating from college, a radiant mother-to-be holding her baby bump. He told her stories, painting a portrait of the vibrant, loving woman he had lost. Later, they sat on the sofa, the sonogram resting on the coffee table between them. This time, when Clara looked at the grainy image, she didn't see evidence of an affair. She saw the nephew she would never know. She saw a dream that had died before it could begin. She grieved with Mark for the loss of Evelyn and for the loss of their little boy. The secret, once a toxic wedge driving them apart, had become a sacred sorrow, a shared point of pain that, paradoxically, was beginning to heal the rift it had created. Mark's arc, from a man blinded by grief and a misguided sense of protection to one who could finally be vulnerable, was completing itself in her presence. And Clara's arc, from a woman who felt invisible and betrayed to the empathetic pillar of their relationship, was her ultimate triumph. She had not been overlooked. She had simply been waiting for the moment her true strength was needed most. What happens when the story we tell ourselves, the one born from fear and suspicion, turns out to be completely wrong? We stand at a crossroads. We can cling to the remnants of our anger, or we can choose the more difficult path, the path of empathy and understanding. Clara and Mark's story is not just about a misunderstanding. It is a powerful testament to the destructive nature of silent suffering and the incredible, restorative power of communication. A wall of secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, can become a prison for two. Mark, in trying to shield his wife from pain, inadvertently inflicted a deeper wound, leaving her to battle imagined demons in the dark. He learned that true strength in a partnership isn't about carrying burdens alone. It's about having the courage to share them, to trust that the person you love is strong enough to help you bear the weight. Clara, in her darkest moment of doubt, found the courage not just to confront, but ultimately to listen. She looked past her own hurt and saw the truth of her husband's heart. She discovered that her greatest gift was not in creating a perfect life, but in having the grace to navigate an imperfect one with love. Their journey from a cold, silent house to a home filled with shared grief and renewed connection reminds us of a fundamental truth: assumption is the enemy of intimacy. We see what we expect to see, and we build narratives based on incomplete information. But love demands more from us. It demands curiosity, it demands vulnerability, and it demands the unwavering belief that the person we chose is worthy of our trust until proven otherwise. The sonogram that almost destroyed their marriage became the very thing that saved it, a symbol of a shared loss that forged a bond stronger than any they had known before. They learned that the foundation of a lasting love isn't the absence of storms, but the willingness to hold on to each other and ride them out together. So, I ask you to look at the people you love. Is there a wall of silence standing where a bridge of communication should be? Are you carrying a sorrow alone that could be lightened if it were shared? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Remind them that you are a team, ready to face any challenge, big or small. Never let a silent sorrow become a shared regret, because the only thing more tragic than a secret is the love that is lost because of it.